I'm being honest, working my way up the corporate ladder was exciting and a major confidence boost. If I didn't feel that City Girl Savings was my life's purpose, I would have happily stayed at the major financial institution I was working for and continued to work my way up. I've always been a reliable, dependable worker, but once my mindset shifted to the value I brought to the table, that's when the growth started happening fast. That's why I'm so excited to talk with millennial career coach Eliana Goldstein about the mindset shifts everyone needs to take their careers to the next level. If you're working your way up the career chain, this one's for you. Hey there, I'm Rhea Reeves, and over a decade ago, I turned my life around through budgeting. I went from being an overspender deep in credit card debt to being the founder and full-time money coach of City Girl Savings. Now, I help women work towards their dream life and tap into their financial power one budget at a time. I fully believe you can live a life you love with a budget, and I'm living proof. The weekly City Girl Savings podcast focuses on the intersection of money and the City Girl lifestyle. Join me every week along with some special guests as I share my experiences, advice, and guidance on navigating life and money as an experience-loving millennial. Before becoming the career coach she is today, Eliana spent 9 years working in the tech and media industries. Throughout that time, she made plenty of pivots without ever having to apply for a job online. And she also perfected her negotiation tactics and was able to grow her salary by 437% before working for herself. So inspiring. Now, Eliana is a career coach for 20 and 30-year-olds looking to reach the next level in their careers or pivot to something completely different. Eliana, welcome to the City Girl Savings podcast. I know I briefly touched on your career background, so can you go a little deeper for us? What was your career journey and how did it lead you to becoming a career coach?
Yes. Well, thank you for that introduction. It makes you feel good when you hear your highlight reel. So I very much appreciate it. So my story and diving a little bit deeper, as you mentioned, I worked in the ad tech space for nearly a decade. I was in sales. And like many people probably listening to this podcast, I always had a good on paper career. I felt successful in it. I was able to move up the ladder. I was able to grow my salary tremendously. But at the same time, I felt very disconnected from what I was doing. And I knew in my heart of hearts that I couldn't and did not want to do this for the rest of my life, but I also really didn't know what to do instead. And that's what led me to make a number of changes and pivots, every single change with the hopes of, okay, this is going to be it. I'm finally going to settle on a place that I really like and that I want to grow. But every place I just felt that same feeling of discontent. And it really wasn't until I decided, okay, I need to make a more radical change that I kind of found my path. I started by really diving into personal and professional development. I went to this very intensive seminar that was a 3-day seminar, and it sort of opened up my eyes to call it having a lot more power than I was giving myself credit for in my career. And it sent me down this path of just a lot of reflection and introspection and networking and market research and really trying to figure out what are the core skills that I like in my career that I want to leverage going forward? And what are the new skills that I want to develop? What are the things that I want to keep? What are the things that I want to strip, right? Just thinking through everything. I call it doing a self audit is virtually what I did. And then through a lot of conversations and market research, I discovered the world of coaching and really felt, okay, this hits on the impact that I want to make. It hits on the skills that I want to leverage. So I ended up going to a program to become a certified professional coach. And at the time, I was still working in corporate, and I figured, let me do this as a side hustle and see what happens. And then it kind of just went from side hustle to full-time business. And I've been here ever since. It's about 4 years now, a little over 4 years that I've been doing this full-time. So I feel very grateful every day to have been able to figure out and be doing what I'm doing.
Oh my gosh. I mean, that's very inspiring. And I have a similar story. I was working in corporate, growing my financial coaching company, and to be able to make that pivot from corporate to working for yourself full time is such an accomplishment. So congratulations on that. Super
Thank
inspiring.
you. You too.
Now, you said something that I think is really interesting, and I have a feeling that the people listening to this episode may resonate. You said that, like, throughout your time in corporate, you always felt like this sense of disconnect, like almost
Yeah.
like you weren't doing exactly what you were supposed to be doing. And you explained some of the work you did to get to a place where now you feel like you're fulfilling your life's purpose. I have no doubt in my mind that people are struggling with the exact same thing. It's
Yeah.
like our society teaches us go to school, go to college, get a job, work your way up, and call it a day.
Yeah.
But that can lead to a lot of feelings of discontentment and feeling like you're not living your life's purpose. So, if
Yeah.
there is someone who is feeling those things but hasn't taken the time to actually think through it and understand like what it means, do you
Yeah.
have any advice for that, or what would you share with those people?
Yeah, well, I would say exactly like you said, if you're feeling that way, it's completely normal. I think a lot of the times we have those feelings, but because society and friends and our parents have always taught us that this is the traditional path, this is what drives success, we force ourselves to stay in those positions, right? I know for myself, like you said, I was in my career prior to this almost a decade. And while to some that might not seem like a long time, most of that decade I was really unhappy, but I kept trying to make it work because I really thought that this was what success meant and I was doing all the right things, right? So I think that it's first the acknowledgement that what you might be doing might not be what's best for you, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you or anything like that. And then I would really move into that place of reflection, right? Really start simply. What I often tell my clients is think about two things: areas of engagement and areas of disengagement. If I'm looking at my career, both where I am right now, as well as where I have been before, what has engaged me, specifically the projects I've done, the tasks that I've done, the skill sets that I've leveraged, the strengths that I've leveraged, right? Thinking about all of that. And what has disengaged me? What has been like, I never want to do this again. It makes me want to pull my hair out. I just, please take this off my plate, right? Just starting with that exercise can help to bring about that reflection, and it can help you to see some patterns. Oh, I'm noticing I really like this type of work and I really don't like this type of work. Why might that be? What might be a way for me to do more of this type of work and less of that type of work, right? So it's simplistic, but it's a really good starting point just to at least get you thinking about things. And then you can kind of see where you net out from there and figure out those next steps from there.
Definitely. I think that's such great advice. I think the first step is really acknowledging that you have those feelings. And like you said, it's okay to feel that way. Now, let's dive a little deeper and figure out what's next.
Exactly. It's where you start.
So, I had mentioned a little bit earlier, but once I started shifting my mindset when I was working in corporate to recognize like the value I was bringing and the quality I brought to the work that I did in my former organization, my development path just moved rapidly.
Yeah.
Thinking back, it was kind of crazy how quickly I grew and developed. Can you talk about the importance of mindset when someone is looking to take their career to the next level?
Yeah. I mean, mindset is everything. And I'm sure you and I, kind of being in this space, hear that all the time, but it really is true. I always say that your mindset is the foundation for the rest of your career. And like any house with a poor foundation, anything you build on top of it falls apart. And that's why often I'll come across people who are really ambitious and seem like they're doing everything right, but they're not feeling that way. They're combating such bad imposter syndrome, right? Or they're struggling to self advocate, all those things because there's that faulty foundation there. So you always, always have to start with that and really think about how do I strengthen that? Because the level of confidence that you project really determines the amount of success that you're going to see in your career. And without that strong mindset, without that confident mindset, it's impossible to project that level of confidence. So, like you hit the nail on the head when you said, once I started leaning into that mindset, everything changed. And that's generally what happens for most people.
Yeah, it's so funny because prior to me starting to do a lot of like self-awareness work, I would have considered myself a very naive individual. Like I wasn't aware, I wasn't very intentional. And the start of my corporate career, that was kind of where I was. I was naive.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I got intentional and saw, like, oh, hold on, like I'm moving in different places in this company and for good reason. Like once I started that self awareness, it really changed the game. So I think being intentional and also just being aware of what is going on and how you're feeling and
Yeah.
what other people are saying can
Yeah.
help you with that mindset too.
Absolutely. And I would add to that when it comes to mindset, and maybe some people have heard of the notion of a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. It's also the idea that you can always change your mindset. That
Yes.
even if you're someone who feels like you're an introvert or you get super self conscious or you're really in your head about things, just because you feel that way right now doesn't mean you need to feel that way forever. And for me, even personally, in my own journey throughout my life as a kid, I was very quiet. I was very self conscious. My parents used to always say that the feedback they'd get from teachers is that, like, I never raised my hand in class. And I remember having these distinct feelings of, I was afraid to speak up because what if I said something stupid? So, really, like those insecure mindsets was most of my life. And now I'm in a place in my life where I do a ton of public speaking and I get in front of people and I will reach out to anyone and their mother. And I don't care if I get rejected. Like, I don't have that level of insecurity anymore. I don't have that self consciousness anymore. But that came with work and intentionality behind my mindset to decide that I wanted to be that way. So
Yes.
you can always change. Of course, it takes work, but like you always have the opportunity to change your mindset.
Absolutely. I think that's incredibly inspiring because there are people who probably feel like they can't change or they won't change or they don't know how to change. And I think that first step is acknowledging that you absolutely can.
Yeah,
And once you believe you can, it's like you start moving in the direction you want to go.
exactly. Exactly.
So, what are some common mistakes you see among clients who have decided that they want to grow in their career, but they don't know where to start? Like maybe they have never been promoted or they don't get the feedback from the managers that they need to feel like they can grow. What
Yeah.
are some mistakes you see with those types of clients?
I think a lot of it is related to a lack of self advocacy. I think a lot of the times when we're in our careers and we want to grow, we expect that if we just hit the goals and we do what's expected of us, then naturally we're going to grow, right? Our manager's going to recognize that, or we're going to get promoted, we're going to get a raise. But unfortunately, especially in corporate America, it really doesn't work that way anymore. Or I don't know if it ever really worked that way. That if there is something that you want, you have to voice it and make it known. And you have to sit down with your manager and be able to say, hey, I'm thinking about my goals for the next year, and this is what I'm interested in, or this is what I want to work towards. What are your thoughts on that? And being able to get their buy in and get their guidance around what you need to do in order to accomplish that. It's not just enough to do what is asked of you. You have to go to bat on behalf of the things that you want for yourself and get that buy in from people, both on your team, both above you. That's really the first step. So I think that's a really big mistake. I think another one, and this kind of relates to it, I think it's mindset related, right? In terms of staying quiet about things. But I think what happens a lot of the times I see with people is that they want something for themselves and then they start getting into this pattern or into this thought process of, well, maybe it's greedy for me to feel that way. Like I do have a good job right now and I'm getting paid pretty well and everything's good. So maybe it's kind of selfish of me to ask for more, right? And then you kind of get into that self-deprecating place or you start reasoning with yourself and then you come into that place where you're just completely settling and that just spirals even further. So I think it's the notion of recognizing that asking for more is not selfish. And you said that really well in the very beginning. You were talking about like once I saw the value that I brought and how I could bring that value even further, it really changed things for me. And it's so important to recognize that anytime you're asking for something in your career, whether it's a promotion, whether it's to work on a project, whether it's to make a lateral move, whatever it might be, it's a value exchange, right? You're asking for them to bring that to you or give that to you in exchange for the value that you bring in return. So it's not selfish, it's not greedy. Everything you ask for in your career should be an exchange of value in some way. So those are just like a couple thoughts on where people go wrong with all of that.
I think one of the biggest things that I took away from what you just shared was you can't be afraid to plant the seeds, right? If your manager
Yeah,
doesn't know you want to grow or doesn't know you want more responsibility and your time is passing you by, but you're not saying anything, you're doing yourself a disservice. So plant those seeds. It may not happen
exactly.
instantly, but if those seeds are planted in your manager, he or she would ideally be thinking about that and hopefully help you get where you want to go.
Exactly. Exactly. You have to plant the seeds, and it's never too early to plant the seeds either.
Yeah, I love that. So I definitely want to talk about negotiating, but I want to share a little bit about my story because I only worked for one company before I took City Girl Savings full time. And when I started at that company, I started part time, very like minimal hourly wage. And eventually I got a full time role and grew. But when I went from that hourly wage to like my first full-time role there, it was a big bump, but the salary really wasn't that high. And every
Mhm.
time I got raises or I got promotions or I switched roles, they would always tell me, "Well, it's a 10% raise," but my
Mm,
starting point was low. So I
right.
it wasn't until I really was late in my career and growing in the company where I finally started making a lot more. But early on, I had so many conversations with different managers that, well, it's based on what you currently make. It's based on what you currently make. And
Yeah.
I, eventually started negotiating as I would apply for roles. But that is a common experience for people who are growing in the same company, but then you hear
Yeah.
about people who are job hopping
Yep.
to make more money. So I would love to talk about that. And then I want to
Yeah.
hear your advice on negotiating, especially because of the success you've seen.
Yeah. So, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. We hear about job hopping all the time, especially among millennials and Gen Zers. And I think there's this connotation that, oh, millennials, Gen Z, they just can't stay anywhere for long enough. They always need to be doing something new. And there's a certain element of truth in that. But the real reason behind it is because they're not seeing the monetary growth that they want to be seeing. And exactly like you described, great, it's a 10% raise, which given these times right now with inflation isn't even really that significant. But based off if you're starting at a lower place, it's really not significant, right? So what choice do people have if they want to see significant growth in their salaries than to jump somewhere else? So I think that if companies really wanted to retain employees, and of course, I understand again, from an economic perspective, it's not always feasible to give these big raises. I think that if people were seeing bigger promotions, bigger raises, they would be much more likely to stay at their company. And I kind of hope that companies can start weighing the pros and cons around that, and the fact that obviously retaining employees is much cheaper than hiring new employees, and giving that consideration. So I think it makes a lot of sense that people job hop. And I think if you aren't seeing the pay increases that you want to be seen and that you believe you deserve to be seen based on the work that you're putting in, then you absolutely should go to another company and see what else is out there, explore your options. Maybe you end up using it as leverage to try to get money more where you are, right? There's nothing wrong with that. I think that as long as you do things respectfully, that you in the end, like, you have to look out for yourself in your career. And like we've talked about, self advocacy and all those things. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So those are like my general thoughts on job hopping, and why I tell my clients all the time, if you think that that's the right thing to do, if you've advocated for more internally, it's not happening, then let's go see what we can find externally.
Yeah. Well, you make a good point. If you've advocated for more, so you have to
Yes.
ask for
Yes.
what you want. So, can you share some guidance
Yeah.
on how people can negotiate their current salary at their current job? Let's say they actually do want an increase. What are
Mhm.
some ways they can go about requesting that or hopefully getting it?
Yep. So, first thing, if you're at your job and you're wanting a pay increase, I would always recommend just doing a little bit of market research, right? Just looking up, based on the role you're in, the city you're in, the years of experience that you have, what are the comps that you're seeing? And where do you fall in line with those comps, right? Are you well below the average? Are you around average? Are you above average? Right? Just giving you a sense, because when you're going to go into a negotiation and you're going to be asking for a number or putting a number out there, you want to make sure it's well researched, right? You don't want to just be like, oh, I'm making 75K, but I'd really like to make 160. So, like, hey, let me ask for 160K, right? Like, it needs to be rooted in something. So, always start by doing your research and just seeing kind of where you fall in line with things. And that can give you a sense of what you should be asking for. It's always good to come in with a specific ask of, this is ideally what I would like to make. So, that's really the first step. And then the second step is kind of what we were touching on before in terms of the value that you bring. So, like anything else, a negotiation is a value exchange. I am asking for more money in exchange for these skills that I bring, this project that I'm going to be tackling, this additional responsibility that I'm taking on, whatever it is. There should always be some type of a value exchange. So, with that value exchange in mind, you want to be able to voice that value, right? Like, what have you done and accomplished that's notable? And how have you driven more revenue for your organization or built in more efficiencies in your role? Like, think about tangible things that you have done to support your team and to support the company within your role. And that's what you want to ideally be bringing to the table, right? Reminding them, oh, again, I'm not just arbitrarily asking for more money. Hey, here's why I'm valuable and here's why I should be compensated more for that. So that's really important. And I tell my clients all the time, like, have a little bit of a script, sketch out exactly what you want to say beforehand. You can practice it in the mirror a few times, keep it short and sweet. We don't want to go into like a 5-minute tangent because that actually makes you seem more nervous and insecure, right? But just quick to the point, based on some of the research that I've been doing, based on the work that I've accomplished, like X, Y, and Z. I wanted to discuss some type of a raise with you. I'm ideally looking for a number of da 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 da. I wanted to bring that to your attention and get your thoughts on it, right? Short and sweet. So those are some of like the most important steps. You obviously see, and I'm sure you're very familiar with negotiation, that it's not as complicated as people think it is, right?
Mhm.
Like, it's pretty simple. It's just that we get so in our heads about it and we get so nervous about it. And that's often the most challenging part about all of it, like managing those thoughts as you're going through it.
Absolutely. And it's crazy because the reality is you don't get what you don't ask for, first and
Exactly.
foremost. And then, secondly, I feel like we're just already overqualified, right? So, like, we're getting in our head. It's really silly because we probably excel or exceed expectations and it's overdue.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And going back to the notion of like the selfishness, I can't tell you how many clients I have spoken to who just say, oh, I just feel bad. Like, I don't know. Is it selfish if I ask for that? And I'm like, why is it selfish? Right? Like, you're paid to do a job. Maybe they're expecting more of you now, right? Or maybe you over delivered on something. Again, it's not an arbitrary ask. Like, it's got to be rooted in something. And that's not selfish, right? You got to look out for yourself. And with anything else, like, practice makes perfect. The more you do this and the more you engage in these self advocacy conversations and asking for the promotions and asking for the raises and asking to be put on a certain assignment, whatever it is, like, the easier they become. But you got
Yes.
to just do it and lean into the discomfort because it will be very uncomfortable at first.
I totally agree with that 100%. Are you loving this episode so far? Well, the money and life level up conversations never end in the City Girl Savings community. Visit citygirlsavings.com for instant access to resources that help you budget, level up your money mindset, and so much more. And make sure you stay up to date with CGS by following us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, all at City Girl Savings. Now, I would love to hear your thoughts on, let's say somebody is actually doing that. They are approaching their managers, asking for raises, giving their value, showing up every day, and their manager says, okay, not right now, maybe at our next
Yeah.
annual review. At what point in time, and I'm sure it's probably situational, but I want to hear your thoughts
Yeah.
anyways. At what point in time would you tell a client, it doesn't seem like you're going to get that raise you want, or it doesn't seem like you're getting the recognition you deserve? It may be time to look somewhere else.
This is a mixed answer because I am almost always telling my clients to be open minded to opportunities. That's not to say that you should always be actively looking for new roles, but I'm a big believer, especially in this climate, as we've seen like lots of layoffs. Hopefully, 2024 is going to be better, but you just never know what's going to happen. And you never know when the rug is going to be pulled out from under you, especially like when you're working for someone else, when you're working in corporate. So I'm a big believer that you should always have your network intact, that you should always be staying open to opportunities if something interesting comes across your desk, right? I also think by doing that, kind of going back to what we were talking about before, it helps you get a better idea and assessment of your values and of your skills, and it can help you kind of price yourself. So I always recommend doing that while you're in a role. And that can just be helpful. Like when you do have a manager that's continuously saying no, because then you can see, well, you know what? I see that my value elsewhere would be X, Y, and Z. they're not seeing that here, maybe I really do need to consider this. But I would say if you're going to your manager, you have a conversation and they say no, but like, not right now, but we can revisit this at mid-year, at end of year. Give it that time again, assuming other things are going well, right? Like if you're still liking other aspects of your job and you're enjoying what you're doing, no need to rush out the door, right? Give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. I would still then, if they say hypothetically, like, okay, we can't talk about it now, but we can reevaluate at the end of the year. I would still bring it up though in between then and the end of the year. And I would just say maybe 2 or 3 months later, hey, I just wanted to check in. We talked about salary a few months ago. I know you mentioned end of the year would be the best time to bring it up. I just want to check that that's still the case, right? Keep it on their radar. So I would do that continuously. And then if it happens to be that now at the end of the year, when they told you this was a conversation you could have and that this would be under consideration, if they say the same thing again and they try to push things further down the line, yeah, I know, I'm really sorry. I know we said end of year, but things have changed and they're starting to give you the runaround. That to me would be a big indicator that this might not be happening or this might take a while. Let's definitely more seriously look elsewhere. Like I
Mhm.
always give a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, but if it comes up again, then it's time to consider other opportunities.
Okay. And I definitely want to talk about looking for work while you have work. But before we
Yes.
do that, I kind of want to finish this negotiating topic. Would you say the approach is different for someone who is applying for a job at a different company and
Mhm.
received an offer? I mean, I know you said do comparisons and just see, like, based on your city and the
Yeah.
role, having a number going in. But does that change any if you receive an offer from a totally different company? I mean, do you advise to, like, just go super high, within moderation? Or I'm curious to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah. So, I mean, the process won't differ too much. If you come to the point of getting an offer and now you have an offer on the table, obviously you definitely want to weigh that offer against other numbers, right? And see, like, are they completely giving you a low ball offer? Is it actually like better than the average, right? You definitely want to have that same idea. And then it's really kind of the same script and idea after that. If you are going to go back and ask for a higher number, you want to be able to justify that, right? And be able to say, I'm so excited about this opportunity, like based on the experience and the skill sets that I've had and what I've been able to do in my previous roles and what I know I can do here. I'm actually looking for X, Y, and Z, right? You want to be able to have that. I would say where it becomes a little more complicated when going for a new job is in terms of like when you bring up salary expectations, right? And there's like a lot of different schools of thought around that where sometimes people will say like, well, what do you do when you're in an initial phone screen with a recruiter and they're asking you what your salary expectations are? Like, I don't want to tell them that early on, right? And I generally agree that the longer you can hold out, the better, because the more of an opportunity you have to exemplify your value, the more it justifies a potentially higher number, right? And if you can like win them over with all your skills and your value and your winning personality, then at the very end, when it comes to negotiating, even if they had like a budget in mind that's lower than what you were hoping for, you can potentially get them up higher. So I think it kind of comes down to like, when do you drop the number? Do you drop the number first? Do they drop the number first? And again, like there are different schools of thought around that. I mean, generally now people say like, wait to hear what their budget is. I actually sometimes think that can be a little bit of a disadvantage. And just from like a negotiation tactic perspective, like generally the first person to drop the number has a little bit more power in the negotiation. So I think it is a little bit of a case by case basis. But in terms of once you get the offer, it is a similar process from a market research perspective, positioning your value, asking for what it is that you want. I know that was like a little bit of a long winded answer, but once I start talking about it, I can go for a long time.
Oh, it's super helpful. But I am curious. Like, let's assume that the offer someone got is like right in line with the market. Like,
Yeah.
maybe it's even above market and it's like
Yeah.
perfect. Are you of the notion that people should always negotiate and request more?
It's so funny you say that. Like literally, this just happened with one of my clients 2 days ago. We were talking about it, and she got an offer that was more than double what she made in her last role.
Well,
And obviously, this is just what she got. And she knew it would be a big bump because she was going from higher ed into working at a tech company. So she knew it was going to be a really big bump. But she was like, the first offer is like more than I could have ever expected. And do I negotiate? Do I not negotiate? I generally say, like, if during the interview process, they ask you for a number, you give a range, and they meet you exactly at that number or at the top of that range, then you're not going to go back and negotiate, right? They're not going to be like, you ask for 120K and they give you 120K. And now you're like, well, I don't know. Can we get that up a little bit? That I think is not a good look. But if it hasn't come up thus far and you get this number, putting aside what you made in your last role, even if it is a really big jump, if you do some research and you see, okay, this is slightly above average, but roles go even up until here, I think it can't hurt to ask, right? Because too, you also don't know when is the next time I'm going to have the opportunity to do this. Like, is this a company that expects that I'm not even going to get a raise for at least the first year, right? So I think, again, as long as it's well researched and you do it respectfully and you can say, thank you so much for this offer. I'm so excited and really eager to join this company based on my research and what I've been seeing and what I specifically think I can bring. I wanted to see if we could counter at a number a little bit above there. Again, I'm not saying that you have to do that. And if you're doing it like just for the sake of it, where it's like another 5 or 10K and it's not really that significant, you just kind of ask yourself why you're doing that. So you can, but you have to think about whether it's worthwhile. And another thing I would say too, as we're talking about this, is that ask yourself, do I want to negotiate for more pay, or is there maybe something else that I want to negotiate, right? If I'm really happy with the actual like compensation package, maybe I want to ask for additional vacation days. Maybe I want to ask for like a higher learning and development stipend, right? Like there are so many other benefits that companies offer these days, and it might be worthwhile to explore other negotiation points outside of just salary alone.
Oh, that's super helpful. And we'll definitely talk about benefits because I think you hit the nail on the head there. Okay, so one quick question, and then we'll go back
Yeah.
to the other point about job searching. Have you ever experienced or had a client who's experienced countering an offer and then the offer being withdrawn? Like, does that happen?
I have never had that happen with a client. I
Okay.
honestly have never had that happen with a client. I know that that's a huge fear that people have.
Yeah.
And I've heard my clients tell me that fear before. And I've never had that happen. I have had people counter and people just say, look, we can't do that. Like, this is our best offer, take it or leave it. Right.
Yeah.
And I know this sounds so cliche to say. If you have a company that reneges an offer because you tried to advocate for more reasonably and respectfully, that is not a company you want to work for, right? Like that is
Right.
going to be an uphill battle the rest of the time that you are there. So like take it as a good thing and just say, okay, you know what? Like again, if you go and you ask for like another 50 or 60K more and they're like, they think you come off as greedy, that's a different story, right? But if you ask for a reasonable number that's in line with comps that you're seeing in the market and they're like, no, we're taking away your offer, there's something shady going on there, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's your sign. Okay, bye. Glad that
Yeah.
didn't work out.
That's a very good perspective. Yeah, that's a fear that I've experienced with clients as well. So I loved hearing your take on that. Okay, so before we talk benefits, I do want to talk about when it's appropriate to tell your current company or your current manager that you are looking for something else or outside of the company, or if it even is appropriate.
Yeah, I think this is also a situation that's very situational and it depends on your relationship with your manager. Some people have really wonderful relationships with their managers, and some managers will say, like, I want the best for you in your career, whether that's here, whether that's elsewhere. I want to be able to be there and support you, right? And God willing, you have that kind of a manager. It's amazing if you do. But obviously, not all situations are like that. And I think you kind of just have to figure out really first and foremost what's best for you, right? Never tell them out of obligation or you feel like you have to or you feel guilty about it if it's going to jeopardize your job security. Like you have to do what's best for you. You never need to give more than 2 weeks notice unless it's like some very special extenuating circumstances. So you just need to remind yourself of that. And again, you know your manager best, you know your company best, and whether they will be supportive in that regard. So I would just like encourage people to really think about, is this a necessity? How will my company respond to it? And if I'm doing this like out of like pure guilt, but there's no real need to, don't do anything that would jeopardize you. Give your standard 2 weeks notice and take it from there.
I have had clients who have current jobs, but they're looking elsewhere, have a fear of when they're applying for the new job saying that they currently work somewhere and that new company calling their current
Yeah.
company for like a background or a reference or whatever. Does that happen or have you seen that happen? And If so, does that change your response to the question I just asked?
I have never seen that happen with a client. Could that potentially happen? Maybe, but that would seem so shocking to me because I would assume that a company knows that you're actively employed there and that they would be putting you in a really uncomfortable situation. I like that would be a very strange thing in my mind for a company to do, right? And I would think that if they really did need references and they needed to speak to someone, I would think that they would go to you first and say, hey, like we need some references. Who are the references that I can call? Right. In
Mm,
past worlds, when you used to put like ask for references on your resume, which by the way, you should not do now, you could specifically give them the references that they could call. Right. So I think generally best practices and the respectful thing to do that I would hope most companies do is if they are going to call, giving you the heads up or asking you who they can specifically get in touch with.
okay, that's helpful. And it sounds like if somebody is fearing the new company contacting the current company, it's probably not likely to
Yeah,
happen. Okay.
definitely not likely. Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about benefits. I know you named a few. What are some common benefits people can expect when getting a new job? But also, what are some of the coolest benefits that you've seen for your clients? I had a client who worked for Google, and anytime that she would work late, like they had a cafeteria and it's like free
Feels
food.
the
Like
best.
you got
Yeah.
food, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, didn't have to
Yep.
pay for it. When I worked in corporate, I had to pay for my snacks and meals,
Oh, yeah.
but that was pretty cool. But I'm curious to hear what you've seen.
Yeah. Obviously, generally, like when you're getting hired in your typical job, like you should be having healthcare benefits, there should be paid vacation time, right? All those different types of things. That's pretty standard, unless it's a contract role, which is actually becoming a lot more commonplace these days, especially in tech, where a lot of companies, just due to, again, like the current economic climate, a lot of companies hire people as contractors and don't pay for healthcare, right? And those standard benefits. And a lot of the times contract roles can turn into full-time roles, but obviously always be aware and ask if a contract job comes with any paid benefits and things like that. In terms of cool benefits that I've seen, tech like obviously has the best benefits, right? Which is why everybody wants to work in tech, especially for women in the workplace. Coverage from a fertility perspective, right? Like coverage like for IVF, coverage for egg freezing now too for women
Wow.
who are wanting support around that and delayed motherhood and things of that nature. I'm like a working mom, so I'm always focusing on those types of benefits. Anything related to like support from a childcare perspective, I think is really interesting and really important. And I should say paternity leave too, right? Like parental leave. It's not just for mothers. Like for any partners in a relationship, they should both have the ability to stay home with their child after a child is born. I mean, yeah, I think like learning and development is really cool. I think, especially with millennials and Gen Zers, where there's such an affinity towards upskilling, access to like LinkedIn Learning, subscriptions being paid for, and Coursera, and all those things, I think are very appreciated. What are other cool benefits?
I've
Hmm.
seen companies paying student loans
Yeah.
now or like matching their employees' student loan payments. That's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, that's definitely very cool. I mean, obviously, I would say, even though it's like very old school, like 401k matches, that's pretty important and definitely
Yes.
very helpful. So, all those standard ones are going to be really important. I was mentioning vacation before. A lot of people say, like, is unlimited vacation really a thing? And is it actually a disadvantage because then you end up not taking vacation days? But I think just like generally a company that like has a lot of flexibility around paid time off. I know there are some companies that offer sabbaticals, right? Where if you've been at the company for X amount of years, you get a 2 month sabbatical. Like, I think that's really cool. And I think, given how much our generations really do value work life balance, anything you can do to support from that perspective is always going to be like greatly, greatly appreciated and an awesome benefit.
Definitely. I couldn't agree more with that. And actually, I want to talk to you about going above and beyond. I remember my former boss. So, this was the position I had before I took City Girl Savings full time. So, I was like working my way up and I was up.
Yeah.
But I remember my former boss told me that if I was going to continue growing in the company, I would need to work longer than my 4:30 shift end. And
Wow.
I was already preparing to leave at this time,
I'm
so I was
done
like,
now.
"Yeah, okay, that's not happening." But it stuck with me, and there's like this and maybe because it was finance, I don't know if other industries are the same, but There is like this emphasis on going above and beyond. And if your salary, you're working 10-hour days, 12-hour days. And I'm curious, do you think that putting in the extra hours and extra effort is the key to getting further up the corporate ladder?
Mhm. I think again, it's a company dependent thing. I think there are definitely industries that are kind of more typical old school industries where that's 100% the mentality, right? Like in finance and banking and things like that, where it really is like you just have to put it, or like you're a lawyer, you're trying to make partner, right? Those things happen. And I think it is kind of standard in some places. My hope is that as companies are trying to cater to a younger workforce, right? Where like at a certain point in time, millennials make up majority of the workforce right now. Soon, like boomers and everything, like they're going to be gone, right? No offense to boomers or anything, but I would hope that companies are now like recognizing that when it's a completely different demographic in the workforce, there's going to be differences in terms of what they value and what they want to focus on. So it's almost like people are going to have to change that mentality because it's just not going to work for people anymore. And I think that there are companies who are better and more recognizing of that and have different ways of rewarding people. I'm also a big believer that like the key to growth is like we talked about before, like self advocacy, right? Like you only get what you ask for, exactly like you said. And also creating internal visibility, which is getting in front of people both at your level, the level above you, C suite decision makers, making your name be known internally makes it a lot easier to grow. And that doesn't necessarily require tons of hours, right? That just requires you being really strategic about who you get in front of and who you set up conversations with. And anyone can do that, right? So I do think there are ways to like gain that notability and grow. But again, it will be industry specific. And I always say that we all know those people at work who we don't think are particularly good at their jobs, but they're always getting promoted, right? You're like, oh God, Sarah, like she's getting that promotion again. Like, why is Sarah getting promoted again? She's not even that good. And it's like those people tend to be the people who are really good from an internal visibility perspective, who just consistently go to bat for themselves, right? So I do think that that is a huge part of the equation. That doesn't necessarily mean like I have to be working 12-hour days.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I up until the end of my time in corporate America, when my shift was over, I was out and I grew even with that kind of mentality. And I
Yeah.
think what helped is obviously being good at what I did, but also
Yeah.
getting in front of the right people and seeing people notice my work and know my name and speaking up in meetings and stuff made a huge difference as well.
Yeah. Speaking up in meetings, all those visibility tactics make such a big difference.
Yeah, yeah. So if there are people who are listening to this and they think that they have to work extra long hours, you don't, just be strategic, like Eliana said, and
Yeah,
make sure that you are putting yourself out there.
exactly. Exactly. Carries a lot of weight.
Yeah. So I'm curious,
Mhm.
any final words of wisdom for women who are listening to this and they want to level up professionally
Mhm.
and like 2024 is their year to do that? What quick tips or guidance or words of wisdom would you share?
So I say this to people a lot. And I know, again, this might sound really cliche, but when I first started coaching, I would focus a lot on what I talked about, like success coaching, right? Like really helping you feel successful. And why that's significant is because I'm a very big believer that, especially among our generation, like I said before, millennial, Gen Z, a lot of us don't really have a clear idea of what career success means to us. We touched on this very early on, but kind of what we're chasing and pursuing is influenced by our parents and by our friends and by society. And because our parents said, oh, you should get this job, you should do that. And before we know it, we're almost like in this rat race going after something that isn't meaningful to us. And then we get that thing, right? Like the dangling carrot, we get that carrot and we're like, I don't even feel good about this, right? So I always at the beginning of the year encourage people to really think about, okay, what does career success actually mean to me? Is it really the salary? Maybe it is great, but maybe it is, like I said, more of a work life balance. Maybe it is like, I just kind of want to coast where I am, go in, do my job, check the box, and then like live for the experiences, right? So, really getting clear on like, what does a successful career actually look like for me? And you can even like do it in a year from now, right? In a year from now, at the very end of 2024, what would a successful career have looked like for me? and really get clear on that vision. And then think about, okay, based on that vision, if I'm being truly honest with myself, what are the goals that I need to set for myself, right? Like, what are the specific actions I need to take? And maybe I am pursuing or chasing something that's actually not in line with that version of success. And if so, how do I shift it to now be chasing something else that is in line with that version? So it's
Hmm.
very high level, but I really believe that that is such a necessary exercise and can really help in reaching that level of career fulfillment that so many of us are trying to pursue.
I 100% agree with that. And I think that expands even outside of career fulfillment,
Yeah.
right? Just life fulfillment in
Yep.
general. Like, what do you really want out of this life? And are you doing things that help you get it?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. It applies everywhere.
Now, when would somebody be ready for a career coach, or at what point in the stage would you recommend somebody seek your services or the services of a career coach?
So, I mean, I really think that there isn't any point that a career coach wouldn't be beneficial. And I know obviously that sounds like, oh, of course you're saying that. But whether you're in a role right now and thinking about potentially making a change, right, then it's good to be proactive, because if you want to land the right career for you, you want to give yourself time with that, right? The last thing that we want to do is rush into another role. That just ends up you being in the exact same situation, right? So, like, you want to give yourself time and space to really be strategic about how you approach things. Then, of course, if you're somebody who's in a role and you're kind of feeling like, I want to get to that next level, whether it's I want to develop the leadership abilities or I want to develop the confidence and work on my mindset, it's never too early to do that, right? Like, the earlier on in your career you do that, the more you built that foundation that is now going to be the foundation for the rest of your career. So I think if you've been thinking about making a change, or you've been thinking, oh, I want to like push myself to develop a little further, it's always a good time to reach out to a career coach.
Perfect. That's very helpful. So, with that being said, I mean, how and where can listeners connect with you? And is there anything special that you're working on currently?
Yes. So you can always connect with me on all the typical social media channels. I'm mostly on Instagram. You can always DM me. I'm on LinkedIn as well. And you can reach out to me. I post content pretty much daily there to support you in your career. So please connect with me there. And in terms of special things that we're working on, so I have a course called the Career Upgrade course, which is like my signature process and methodology to what I say, find and land a well paid career that you actually love. So I have that available for people who need the support in their careers. I believe that we have a special offer for listeners today if you are interested in grabbing that, and would love to support you guys inside of that course and that program.
Awesome. Well, I will definitely link to that course and the discount code in the show notes. I'll also link to all of your social media channels so people can connect with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show today,
Yes.
sharing your insight and expertise. I think it was incredibly inspiring, and I hope that people listening to this are feeling motivated.
Yes, me too. No, thank you so much for having me. As you can tell, I love talking about these things. So I appreciate you having me here.
Thanks so much, Eliana.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for letting me be the money coach in your ear today. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the City Girl Savings Podcast and you feel empowered and motivated to take the next step in the journey to your dream life. Remember, if someone like me, a millennial who loves to travel, new experiences, and iced coffees can live a life they love on a budget, you can too.